Part One of Ghosts and Family Legends, a volume for Christmas by Catherine Crowe. This recording is in the public domain. Part One, Round the Fire, First Evening. "But there are no ghosts now," objected Mr. R. "Quite the contrary," said I. "I have no doubt there is nobody in this circle who has not either had some experience of the sort in his own person, or been made a confidant of such experience by friends whose word on any other subject he would feel it impossible to doubt." After some discussion on the existence of ghosts and cognate subjects, it was agreed that each should relate a story, restricting himself to circumstances that had either happened to himself, or had been told him by somebody fully entitled to confidence, who had undergone the experience. We followed the order in which we were sitting, and Miss P. began as follows. "I was some years ago engaged to be married to an officer in the Regiment. Circumstances connected with our families prevented the union taking place as early as we had expected, and in the meanwhile Captain S., whose regiment was in the West Indies, was ordered to join. I need not say that this separation distressed us a good deal, but we consoled each other as well as we could by maintaining a constant correspondence, though there were no steam packets in those days, and letters were much longer on their way and less certain in their arrival than they are now. Still I heard pretty regularly, and had no reason for the least uneasiness. One day that I had been out shopping, and had returned rather tired, I told my mother that I should go and lie down for an hour, for we were going out in the evening, and I was afraid I might have a headache, to which I am rather subject. So I went up to my room, took down a book, and threw myself on the bed to read it, or sleep as it might happen. I had read a page or two, and feeling drowsy had laid down the volume in order to compose myself to sleep, when I was aroused by a knock at my chamber door. "Come in," I said, without turning my head, for I thought it was the maid come to fetch the dress I was going to wear in the evening. I heard the door open, and a person enter, but the foot was not hers, and then I looked round and saw that it was Captain S. What came over me then I can't tell you. I knew little of mesmerism at that period, but I have since thought that when a spirit appears it must have some power of mesmerizing the spectator, for I have heard other people who had been in similar situations describe very much what I experienced myself. I was perfectly calm, not in the least frightened or surprised, but transfixed. Of course, had I remained in my normal state, I should either have been amazed at seeing Captain S. so unexpectedly, especially in my chamber, or if I believed it an apparition, I should have been dreadfully distressed and alarmed. But I was neither, and I can't say whether I thought it himself or his ghost. I was passive, and my mind accepted the phenomenon without question of how such a thing could be. Captain S. approached the bedside, and spoke to me exactly as he was in the habit of doing, and I answered him in the same manner. After the first greeting, he crossed the room to fetch a chair that stood by the dressing-table. He wore his uniform, and when his back was turned, I remember distinctly seeing the seams of his coat behind. He brought the chair, and having seated himself by the bedside, he conversed with me for about half an hour. He then rose, and looking at his watch, said his time had expired, and he must go. He bade me good bye, and went out by the same door he had entered at. The moment it closed on him, I knew what had happened. If my hypothesis be correct, his power over me ceased when he disappeared, and I returned to my normal state. I screamed, and seized the bell rope, which I rang with such violence that I broke it. My mother, who was in the room underneath, rushed upstairs, followed by the servants. They found me on the floor in a fainting state, and for some time I was unable to communicate the cause of my agitation. At length, being somewhat calmed, I desired the servants might leave the room, and then I told my mother what had happened. Of course she thought it was a dream. In vain I assured her it was not, and pointed to the chair, which, wonderful to say, had been actually brought to the bedside by the spirit. There it stood, exactly as it had been placed by him. Luckily, nobody had moved it. I said, "You know where that chair usually stands. When you were up here a little while ago, it was in its usual place. So it was when I lay down. I never moved it. It was placed there by Captain S." My mother was greatly perplexed. She found me so confident and clear, yet the thing appeared to her impossible. From that time I only thought of Captain S. as one departed from this life. Suspense and its agonies were spared me. I was certain. Accordingly, about a month afterwards, when one morning Major B. of the Regiment sent in his card, I said to my mother, "Now you'll see. He comes to tell me of Henry's death." It was so. Captain S. had died of fever on the day he paid me that mysterious visit. We asked Miss P. if any similar circumstance had ever occurred to her before or since. "Never," she answered. "I never saw anything of the sort but on that occasion." "I have no experience of my own to relate," said Dr. W., "but in the course of my late tour in Scotland, I went, amongst other places, to Skye, and I found the whole island talking of an event that had just happened there, which may perhaps interest you. There was a tradesman in Portree of the name of Robertson. I believe he was a sort of general dealer, as shopkeepers frequently are in those remote localities. Whatever his business was, however, it frequently took him to the other islands or the mainland to make purchases. He had arranged to go on one of these expeditions, I think to Raasa, when a friend called to inform him that a meeting of the inhabitants was to be held on some public question in which he, Robertson, was much interested. "You had better defer going till after Friday," said Mr. Brown. "We can't do without you, and it's very possible you may not get back in time." "Oh yes, I can do all my business and be back very well on Thursday," said Mr. Robertson. Objecting that if he waited over Friday it would be no use going till Monday, Brown tried to persuade him to alter his plans, but in vain. "However," said he, "you may rely on seeing me on Thursday, if you'll look in the evening," as I would not miss the meeting on any account. This conversation took place at an early hour on Tuesday morning. Immediately afterwards Mr. Robertson bade his wife and children good bye, and proceeded to the boat which left at 11 o'clock, having on board, beside himself, 2 other passengers and 2 boatmen. On Thursday evening, Mr. Brown, who had been busying himself in fortifying and encouraging their adherence against the next day, and had taken upon himself to answer for his friend Robertson's presence, as soon as he had finished business, set off to keep his appointment with the latter, anxious to ascertain that he was arrived. His anxiety was soon relieved, for on his way he met him. "Well, here you are," said he, holding out his hand. "Yes," answered Robertson, not appearing to notice the hand, "I have kept my promise." Upon that Mr. Brown introduced the subject of the meeting, and mentioned the hopes he had of carrying the question, with which Robertson seemed satisfied. But as soon as possible, turning the conversation into another direction, he began talking to his friend about his wife and children, and certain arrangements he had wished to be made respecting his property. His mind seemed so much more engrossed with these matters than the meeting, that little was said upon the latter subject, and Mr. Brown, having parted with him in the street, rather wondered why he chose such a moment to discuss his private affairs. The next morning, at the appointed hour, the principal inhabitants of the place assembled in a public room at the Tun. Brown, who wanted to say a word to Robertson, lingered at the door, but as he did not come, he thought he must have arrived before himself, and went up-stairs. "Is Robertson here?" said he, on entering the room. "No," said one, "I'm afraid he's not come back from Raasa." "Oh yes," said Brown, "he'll be here. I saw him yesterday evening." They then discoursed about the matter at hand for some time, till finding the chairman was about to proceed to business, Robertson's absence was again reverted to. "I know he's come back," said one, "for I saw him standing at his own door as I passed last night." "He can't have forgotten it," said another. "Certainly not, for we spoke of it last night," said Brown. "Perhaps he's ill," suggested somebody. "Just send your man to Mr. Robertson, and say we are waiting for him," said Brown to the landlord. The landlord left the room to do so, and in the meantime they proceeded to business. Presently the landlord re entered the room, saying that Mrs. Robertson answered that her husband had not returned from Raza, and that she did not much expect he would be back till night. "Nonsense!" cried Brown. "Why, I saw the man yesterday according to appointment, and had a long conversation with him." "I am sure he's come back," said one who had spoke before. "I was coming down the street on the other side of the way, and I saw him standing at the door with his apron on. I should have crossed over to speak to him, but I was in a hurry." "It's extraordinary," said the landlord. "Mrs. Robertson declares he's not come." Some jokes were then passed about the apparent defection of Robertson from his spouse, and the meeting concluded their business without him, his party being exceedingly annoyed at his absence, which they thought not fair to the cause. "He should have given us his support." "I suppose he has altered his opinions." "Then he had better have said so." It struck me certainly that he was rather lukewarm on the subject when I talked to him last night, but on Tuesday I saw him just before he started, and he said he would not miss the meeting on any account. I'll go and look after him, and know what he means." Accordingly, Brown proceeded to his friend's house, and found Mrs. Robertson and her children at dinner. "Weel, Mr. Brown," she said, "so your meeting's over." "Aye," said he, "but where's Robertson? Why didn't he keep his word with us?" "Why, you see, I dare say he meant to be back. Indeed, I know he did. But business won't be neglected, and I suppose he could not manage it." "Do you mean to say he's not come back?" said Brown. "Sure I do," answered Mrs. R. "Of course he'd have been at the meeting if he had." "But people saw him last night, standing at his own door," answered the cautious Brown. "Na, Mr. Brown, don't you believe that," said Mrs. R., laughing. "They that say that had too much whiskey in their een." The children laughed at the idea of anybody seeing their father when he was at Raza, and on the whole it was evident that if John Robertson had returned, it was unknown to his family. But what could be his reason for so strange a proceeding? And why, if he wanted to evade the meeting, had he needlessly shown himself at all? Why not really stay away from Portree? However, Robertson did not appear, and later in the day the landlord of the Tun said to Brown, as he was passing the door, "You must have been mistaken about seeing Mr. Robertson. The boat from Raza is not come in." "Then he must have come over by some other, for I not only saw him, but walked and talked with him. I can't think what he can mean by playing a hide and seek in this way." "It's very extraordinary," said the landlord, "for I am expecting a hamper from Raza, and so, hearing from you that Mr. Robertson was come, I went down to inquire about it; but they declare no boat of any sort has come in these 2 days. The wind's right against them." "I know the boat from Raza is not come back," said the porter, "for I saw Jenny McGill just now, and she says her husband is not returned." "Really, you'll persuade me that I'm not in my right senses," said the perplexed Brown. "If ever I saw Robertson in my life, I saw him last night. I was going to call upon him, as he had asked me to do so before he went away; but I met him not far from my own house, and what is more, he told me of a thing I did not know before, regarding a purchase he had made, and spoke of what he intended to do with it." "It's most extraordinary," said the landlord. "Yes, sirs," said an old fishwife who was standing by. "I wish it may not be John Robertson ghaist that you saw, for the wind's sair agin them, and I've a bad dream about Jamie McGill last night." They all laughed, but this was the first suggestion of the sort that had been made, and though he would not confess it, Brown began to feel rather uncomfortable. The more so as several things were recalled to his memory that had not struck him at the time. He remembered that Robertson had avoided shaking hands with him, either on meeting or parting, as was his wont. He had even then been struck with the grave tone of his conversation, and with his choosing that particular moment for pressing on his friend's attention what did not appear to have any urgent interest at present. Then it occurred to him that he looked ill and sad. He had attributed this to fatigue, but now, putting everything together, he could not help feeling a considerable degree of uneasiness. He kept hovering about Robertson's house, and from that to the shore all day. went to bed at night quite nervous, and by the next afternoon the alarm had spread and become universal. It was not without cause. John Robertson never came back. The boat had been lost. How was not known, as all on board had perished. However, Mr. Brown took upon himself to be the friend and guardian of the bereaved family, and the information he received in that melancholy interview he was enabled to turn much to the advantage of their circumstances." "A very remarkable story," said I. "Yes," answered Dr. W., "very remarkable indeed, if true." "And is it not true?" I said. "Remember we are upon honour. I should think it a very ill compliment if any one attempted to mystify us with an invented story." "I did not invent it, I assure you," replied Dr. W. "I give it to you as it was given to me on the spot. If you ask me if I believe it, I can't say I do." "Do you think the people who told you believed it?" "They certainly appeared to do so." "And did it seem generally believed?" "I can't say but it did. But of course one must have wonderfully strong evidence before one could believe such a thing as that." "Granted, but unless you had seen the thing yourself, you cannot have stronger evidence of a phenomenon of that description than that it was believed by those who had good reason to know the grounds of their belief. They were able to judge how far Mr. Brown was worthy of credit, and they had the advantage of having witnessed his demeanour at the public meeting, when he asserted that he had walked and talked with Robertson, at a time he could not possibly know if he was telling a lie, that the man would not sooner or later return to confute him. Besides, as far as we see, it would have been a useless and wicked lie, inasmuch as it was calculated to make the man's family very uneasy. His subsequent conduct does not at all countenance the persuasion that he was capable of such a proceeding." "Certainly not, but you know the Scotch are very superstitious." "I can't agree with you. The higher and lower classes of the towns are exactly similar in that respect to the same classes of England. In all countries the lower classes are more disposed to put faith in these things, because they believe in their traditions and adhere to the axiom that seeing is believing. The higher classes, on the other hand, are carefully educated not to believe in such traditions, and to reject the axiom that seeing is believing, if the thing seen is a ghost. Now I freely admit that our senses often deceive us, and that we think we see what we do not. Everybody with the slightest intelligence has, I suppose, learnt to distrust his own senses to a certain extent. But why on one particular point we should reject their evidence altogether, I never could understand." "You have heard, I suppose, of spectral illusions?" said the doctor. "Of course I have, and admit their existence, but we have so many cases on our side, that doctrine will not cover, and it is so impossible for you to prove that any particular case of ghost seeing falls under that head, that it is no use discussing the subject. It complicates the difficulty, I confess, but can never decide the question. I was going to say, however, that the shopkeepers and middle classes of Scotland are anything but what you mean by superstitious. The class to whom Brown and Robertson belong is the most hard-headed, argumentative, and matter-of-fact in the kingdom; and their religion, which is eminently unimaginative, so far from inducing a belief in ghosts, would have a precisely opposite tendency, because ghosts do not form an article of belief in either the longer or shorter catechism. In the remoter districts of the Highlands the people are said to have more of what you would call superstition, but the same peculiarity is remarked in all mountainous regions, and as it has never been satisfactorily accounted for, we will not enter into the discussion now. Part 2